Great, thanks very much. Thank you very much for coming. I'm Liam Maxwell. I'm the National Technology Advisor for the British Government. One of the things we have talked about a lot, and this morning was really strong, about culture and the use of open as culture and how you deliver change. And so what I'm going to talk about is how we delivered change within a large organization using open as the dynamic. Now, it is one of those things that you get a load of neologisms in government, so people suddenly start thinking up new words which become the word of the year. I sensed on Wednesday, really, people were talking a lot about lift and shift. And I think one of the things that we found when we started in government was people started talking about agile as a thing. And I'm here to say, be careful about those neologisms and how they're used. Because if you introduce a concept like agile is a good thing into government, people start building huge things out of agileness. And people start building infrastructure in an agile way. And I remember once finding myself in a presentation where somebody described their approach to it and their approach to change as agillution, which is agile but done at their own pace. It was strange because it didn't actually understand what agile TM really means. So part of this is about talking about the culture of what we do, and really at the bottom is what you find when you start moving and changing an organization, and how we used open as a dynamic for that. So using open to enforce change. So imagine, if you will, that you discovered yourself unexpectedly winning an election and starting to run a government. What do you do at that point when you start to look around you and how you can change what you're doing? So our challenge was this. In 2009, government IT cost £16 billion in the UK. Now, often I found people say it's quite worrying when you go over about £1 million. It's quite difficult to imagine what that money is. 16 billion is quite a lot of money. So that's 1% of our economy was spent on the administrative functioning of technology in government. A lot of money. And my minister had a particularly interesting way of describing that. It wasn't good. It didn't work for people. And we didn't do the most important things. When you find yourself in a new place, you have to map where you are, and you have to measure where you are. Unless you can work out where you are qualitatively, where in the cycle you are, what you are using, you won't be able to find out how to play the game, how to be in the chessboard. Simon Wardley's here, he's doing a talk about much more of this later. But we use these techniques to identify where we were. The other thing is measure where you are. Now, who here thinks the government is big? The British, think about it, the British government. Would you say it was a big organization, 400,000 people, lots of things, aircraft carriers? We have huge buildings. Government itself, it turns out, isn't very big. The compute load to run a government isn't enormous. Government itself is, in fact, not large in compute terms. It's hell of a complex, but it's not large. And so we use some tools, just using transparency of data, helped us identify what we were doing and also how much we were doing. So the initial change, we had to bring in controls. We brought in the process of spend controls, and those spend controls helped us identify whether the people were building things that we really needed at that point. Think about it, 2011, we were still at the end of a financial crisis. It was very important that we only started building things that we needed to use, that we hadn't built elsewhere. And that meant you had to have a view over the whole system, over the whole ecosystem within a government, to check why you were building one thing in one place and one thing in another. Now, if you look at how technology grows, you'll see that it starts from things that are very new, and they move through from ubiquity, through transition, through to a common or a commodity service. Now, we realized that as a government, this speed of transition of technology is much, much faster than we could react to. So our game was not about being a part of that cycle. Our game was trying to identify how we worked within that cycle. The problem was we had done this. All of the things that we were using were special. Everything that we made, everything we created, everything that had been built for us was special, and very much special to each department. And sometimes special within a department to a particular business process. Now, that's a problem about the way that governments spend money. This is how the business case process works. You get a business case through to run an immigration system at a different time when you get a business process through to run a visa system. But when you sit down and think about it, the visa system and the immigration system all use very similar components. We just hadn't identified it and had just gone and bought and gone and bought and gone and bought. In many ways, we were procuring our way out of trouble, or so we thought. But in fact, we were digging a deeper hole. Because what we'd done is we then locked everything into a series of strong system integrator contracts, which meant that we couldn't break out of the change and cause the change we needed because we had contractually agreed to do things in one particular way. The things that we had decided in 2008 to do were going to be valid until 2017. Now that's an enormous, enormous jump for an organization to take. You've really got to know that nothing's going to change during that period if you're going to make money in that space and run an efficient service. So, first thing, we had to change our shape. Okay? Governments are built like this. You have the Department of International Development, the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Transport, the Ministry of Education. They're all separate entities. And all of them for years have been running as separate entities. And they haven't been using this. They haven't been using any form of approach to platform or commonality, mostly because they didn't know what the other departments were doing. Just the simple act of centralizing and opening data enabled us to see how much on how many things we were doing that were common. We also found there were 4 main obstacles. Now, I refer to this as the square of despair, because if you take over a large organization, one of the problems you're going to find straight away is these 4 things will get you. Okay? Now, the most pernicious of these I'll save for last, but capability. We had to find modern technologists to come and work with us. And that meant we needed to offer people great opportunities to come and work in a government. And many times, working for the government doesn't appear to be an attractive thing. I've got lots of friends who do very boring jobs and get paid lots of money for doing that. I offer completely the opposite of that. Okay? In government, you have the opportunity to change your government, change what your nation does, but we never pay government at the same rate. And part of that is because it is a sort of trade-off at that point. The experience that you will gain in 3 years in government is like 10 years in another organization, because if you know what you're doing, your capacity and your capability to change things is immense. And that's what attracted 200 great technology leaders to come back and work in government. The next thing is security. We were still running our security with a view to being in the Cold War, really. We had officials who were working on social impact bonds and charities under the same security restrictions as people working in an intelligence organization. So we had to move most of government and the delivery of public services, 97% of a government and the delivery of public services is able to run at the same level of security as a Skadden or a Pricewaterhouse or a Deloitte. It's a great professional services firm. So we needed to run at that rate. And that meant we had to review all of our security settings and introduce one common security layer called official, at which everything can work that is not national security related. That also meant that we stopped spending huge amounts of money securing and locking down people that needed to be open. And we could spend the money on the secure areas properly. Then there's procurement. Now, procurement is very difficult sometimes to break because it's the thing that's always there. It's the thing which all governments always run with. All large organizations have issues with procurement. And we had to make sure that we could start procuring not just from big companies, but from the best companies. And a little bit later I'll explain how we did that. But the best was what we were looking for, not the biggest. Not the people that could spend £60,000 as if it were a drop of the hat to fill in a procurement form and run a bid team for 3 months. We needed to be able to run things where people we could buy from the best in the market, the most innovative. And many times what we were doing in procurement was putting those people off. And then legacy, the most pernicious of all. You can't do that because it's legacy. You can't change that because if you change it, you'll break it. There will be riots in the streets. I had that said to me several times. We created a way of moving legacy away. It's called the Crown Hosting Service. What we do is we move our legacy systems into a special hosted service which we run. It's a zombie insurance fund in the end. It allows you to put stuff in, the legacy can be looked after, it can all be helped to stay there, whilst you can then focus on the future. And your future is about building things in the cloud. Now, culturally, different organizations do things different ways. I'm not saying that's the way that would work immediately for you, but believe me, that works for us. The creation of our own Hotel California for government IT has meant that we can put stuff in, you can put it in, we'll run it, it's nice, it'll always be looked after. You just can never check it out. So, we found that technology was moving faster than government. We had to be free to keep up. We had to change shape, as I said. So keep that in mind. How do you introduce platforms? How do you introduce common services to an organization that is a large organization full of tremendously gifted professional people, but who have always been working in silos? So, the changes we made. First, we had to say what good looked like. So we wrote down what good looked like. We literally wrote a manual for CTOs, which we then changed into the technology code of practice. And this was agreed by everybody who was a technology leader. So we convened everybody, made sure everyone agreed what good looked like. We then agreed some design principles, because if you're designing services for citizens, we want to have a common approach. A citizen does not look at the government and think, actually, that's really interesting, it's 24 different departments. A citizen looks at the government and goes, it's the government, it's one thing. So if you're going to have a common approach to how you deal with citizens, you need to have common design principles, again, which are agreed and which are shared. One of the things we did to make sure that we could work properly is we realized we were going to be using the internet quite a lot, so we needed to have open standards. And one of the most difficult open standards we had to use was, how do you explain to a citizen that they need to, at some points, have a document which they need to fill in or change or modify? We had to do that in a way that didn't require people to sign in and use one particular piece of software. So we defined what an open document format should be for the government. There was an enormous amount of peer review. We did the same consultation process as you would do for opening a new airport to make sure we could do that. But that brought in the capability to have common open standards. And again, just culturally, this held people's views that open standards are important. We cut out a lot of friction, so that was the organization chart that I had when I started. If any of you can work out how to do this bit, I never got there. I never worked out that bit on the right, because it was just too complex. So we changed that. We introduced this. This is our organization. This is our primary motivation. Our primary organizing thing was a browser. And if you use a browser, these things become really simple. You can identify where you have common services that you all share. You can identify where you have common specific things like ERP, which just should be done in a similar way. And then it allows you to create new great digital services, allows you to create the mission IT, the internal IT, to work with people, taking away and abstracting all of that gumph, which is the infrastructure, and using the cloud for that, and declaring the cloud as the primary place for that, is the main change within that space. And we needed to work with lots of innovative companies. So we changed the way that we worked with people in our marketplace. We created a new tech sector called GovTech. And this GovTech sector was about, how do we bring people into to work with the government and make it easy for them to work with the government, not make it easy for government to work with them. It's a really important difference. And we grew a huge number of jobs, we grew a huge number of innovations, but what happened was this meant that our tech cost less and was better, because we were going to companies that specialized in particular components rather than going to one big company and saying, please take it all away from me and do it. So that's 1.6 billion sales. 55, I've done a new number, 50 was 54. 55% of that is small, medium enterprises. So it's a way of government helping build the innovation and helping grow the businesses. And so we now feel the UAK is a center of digital excellence in government. We're the #1 digital government according to the United Nations. And we have started our move because what we've done is instead of treating our technology on the left of that diagram, we're now doing so much more of it on the right. We're doing so much more using the capability of common tools so that you can focus on the things that are important in government, which is building great services for your citizens. Now, a lot of this is down to the use of one four-letter word, open. Open helped us change this. Open was our disruptor. If you need to construct a narrative to change your government, open works. So, 4 things we did that were open. 1, open markets. As you'll see, we had a small number of providers. We now have lots of providers. We have an open market which people will come and invest in, and people will grow their businesses in the UK. We committed to using the cloud. We committed to using the internet to run our government. And by doing that, that meant that we had to, because it's a common service, it's a common resource, we have to commit to using open standards. We have to be very adult about the fact that we want to use open standards across the whole of the government. So if you are a police force, or you are an ambulance service, or you're a fire and rescue service, you should be getting your updates and your data about incidents in a common format, in a common way, according to common standards, so you can all work together. It actually starts to get really important at that point, that people can understand what's going on. And that was one of the main lessons we learned about the bombings in the 7/7 bombings, was that all of our emergency services had to work together, clearly, effectively. And open standards are right at the core, not of that, but across the whole approach to what we do as government, so that we can use the resources effectively. We committed to open data. You'll know that Tim Berners-Lee and Nigel Shadbolt established the Open Data Institute, and we started to publish data about what we were doing, not just about spending. I actually passed a legislation that meant that local authorities would publish all of their spending over £500. We then started introducing new tools to help people change their behavior using open data. One of the most successful things we did in a local government was we published the energy usage of our buildings. Now, by publishing the energy usage of the buildings, it then meant that everyone could see which building was leaving the lights on and not. And actually, by putting the email address of the person responsible for the building, we managed to save 25% of our energy spend without actually talking to anybody. It just happened. Because people wrote in and went, "You've left the lights on." And as soon as that happened, the officials changed the behavior. It was wonderful. It was a really good way of making data work for us and use open data. But also, the open data that we publish around our government helps now power big companies. I don't know if you saw on stage during that keynote a guy called Herman the Ruler from Improbable. But Improbable runs on state data. The city they've constructed is constructed out of the open data that we provide as a government. We have in our hands an enormous amount of the data that we can provide and run and help our economy with. And yet we didn't make it open in the past. We can really help that. And then finally, open source. I'll talk a little bit more about why open source is so important to us, but open source was one of those 4 that drove the change of what we did about government. And it's the heart of what other governments are doing. If you look at those 4 governments, you'll notice that they are similar to us in a way. We picked and worked with these. We formed a group called the D5 because we were all at the similar stages of our growth. The Korean government, on the bottom right, started to build a digital marketplace, rather like our G-Cloud, like our digital marketplace, about 4 years before we did, because they identified that they needed to get that innovation in. The Estonian government, possibly, and everybody always cites the Estonians as a great digital government, use a component called the X-Road, which they've open sourced, which is a component which allows government services to work together so that you can join up. It's a core part of one of their great signature policies, which is called once only. Once you've told the government who you are and where you live, the government should never be required to ask you again. That's wonderfully simple. But if you imagine the mess that you get when you start a government, it's quite difficult to get there, but that's where you go. That's what they've got. New Zealand has done a lot of work. They did great pioneering work on identity with RealMe. And also, I remember the first time I walked into a New Zealand government office and there were storyboards and profiles and people working in a proper way, a proper agile way on new developments. And we realized that New Zealand was very like the UK and where we were in our journey, and as was Israel. And you'll notice that gov.il on the top left, they've taken off the picture these days, but gov.il and the New Zealand government site looks rather like gov.uk. And there's a reason for that, because to a large part, they are the same thing. So, we created the same thing. We created a government of the internet, a government that started using the internet properly and effectively to deliver its services. Let's just have a think about what's next. We used open to unlock change. We used open to create competition to help us grow. Competition was the thing that drove it. It wasn't about saying, we didn't stand up and say everything must be open source. What we did was we created the conditions for success for people that worked using open standards. And in doing so, open source became more and more a component of our government. In 2011, I was sat down by a security analyst who read out why you should not use open source software to me in front of his team so that he felt that he had delivered the lesson to me. It was one of those things that I always remember because he's not saying that now. It's really obvious that that was a huge route, but it wasn't that we'd said we will now back open source. It was we said we will back competition, we will back openness. And also the high level of small, medium business engagement is there because we back competition, that we back the ability for a small company to do exactly the same work as a large company, and possibly at a lower rate. So some of the times when we started to get going, famously there was an occasion when a hosting service was being sold by a company for £5 million, we got exactly the same thing for 54,000. Okay? Two factors of difference, 2 orders of magnitude difference. And so we moved from one to the other. We moved from silos. We introduced common platform services. And those common platform services allowed us to rationalize what we were doing and also allowed us to share what people are doing. And services like GovUK Verify and GovUK Pay and GovUK Notify are platform services that enable you to deliver common functionality to parts of government. Think for a second about Notify. So Notify, which is run by one of my heroes in government, a guy called Pete Herlihy. Notify shows you where and tells you when your tools, your passport, your driving license, when it is coming back. Now, we get 500 million telephone calls a year. 25% of them were to say, I don't know where something is on the internet, can you help? In your website, how do I find it? So we made a website that worked for the user, and it generated savings. Those savings, if you think about it, were people not calling. And if you're getting 500 million telephone calls at £12 a call, there's a lot of money to save. 25% of those were people saying, where's my thing? So by introducing a notification service, you can help people find out where their services are, find out where their passport, their driving license, or their application for a license is, and people can then not call in, and we save money. And all of these things are sensible, straightforward approaches to government, which we've started to bring in. But I wanted to, as we talk about open and open source, just have a think about the picture of governments. There are lots of people from different countries in this room, and you all have a government. On the right-hand side there is the Norwegian Driving License Agency, or the Norwegian Ministry of Transport. And they issue driving licenses to Norwegians. They ask people for their identity, they ask them for a photograph, they record it, they keep it in a database. It's really strange because the British DVLA do exactly the same thing. So why are we all trying to do exactly the same thing differently? In America, there are 50 states. Each state issues a driving license. They do exactly the same thing, but issuing a driving license in the UK is just a weird jurisdictional thing. We have a monopoly market. We don't compete. It may be of, good news, but we're not going to set up a driver license service in Norway because they've already got one and they've got a monopoly on that market. But we do the same thing. And in compute terms, we're doing exactly the same thing as we go through this. So this leads us to think, as we learnt by sharing the code of GovUK, that actually there's an opportunity to share a lot more between different governments. And that by sharing not just our code, but our tooling, and also the methodology that we brought in, we can go and work and help other governments to get over all the barriers that we started to face. But in addition, and one of the things we learned by sharing with other governments, is that we get a hell of a lot back in terms of knowledge, capability, and help, because they've thought about these things in a completely different way. So if you think about how you would run and build a government, and if you had turned up and found yourself needing to work with a new government, one of the things you need to do is work with open source properly. Those components of open data and open standards play into this, because as you build your new services and as you build your new government in the cloud, open source can help. Let me just talk you through this rather busy slide. Lots of people worry about platform as a service and worry about the infrastructure underneath. And remember, most of IT for the last 20 years has been about people building great big infrastructures that they own and they can go and polish every Tuesday when they need to. And they feel massively secure because they can see the servers. When I first started in politics, I walked into the local government office, the data room of my local government, and there were 130 servers and 130 cathode ray tubes. And it was 2007. It was like going back in time then. Now, in 3 years, we had made it a rule within the authority. 2010, we bought our last application server. We wrote it in the Constitution that the council would never buy another application server. In my world, if I ran the world, it would be a criminal offense to go and buy an email server. Okay? All of those things, they're common, and if you move on to having an abstracted platform as a service approach, it means that your platform and your common infrastructure should be there. We shouldn't talk about CIOs. I mean, a CIO to me is a chief infrastructure officer. It's the person that runs all of that stuff so that you can build great things on top of it. So once you've got the PaaS, then you move on to your registers. Now, as a government, one of the glorious things we have is huge numbers. Imagine 300 years of building departments. Can you imagine how many different data sets we have? We have huge numbers of data sets all the way across every department. The personnel data sets, as we now build our digital economy bill, we have to create a register of where we store data for people. We also need to create registers of information. We found that we had 15 different lists of and databases of countries. Think about it, even that most basic thing, the names of another country, there were 15. Because everyone had an argument about whether something was called the Republic of this or that. And ultimately, if we're going to work as a government, we have to recognize there must be a list of countries. There must be a list of universities. There must be a list of schools. If we only have one list, the efficiency of running a government becomes much more effective, but also things work more effectively for people. We don't want to get to the stage where you send somebody to the wrong school, or you put people or pay the wrong university. And that can happen if you have different lists. So we want to make sure that works, and we have a program of registers, which is run by a guy called Paul Downey, who is putting together this way of consolidating our registers together so that you have a common approach and a common set, a single canonical source, persistent canonical source of data with provenance and integrity. That allows you to build a modern functioning state. And then also open source components. Because we are building components and we are building our work in components, we can share those components with other organizations. They can become better, and therefore when we start to build a new service, we don't have to build everything from scratch. We can go and use the components that people have made before. When they were building the prison booking service, it was amazing because people were saying, well, you know, the internet solved booking years ago. Just work out the functionality around this particular use case of doing it in prisons. And so by building open source components with other governments, we believe that we will move to a much smoother and much more effective way of building services that actually meet the needs of the users. And by applying that discipline, it means that you can then focus on building services that work for users, that meet user needs. And that means you have to create multidisciplinary teams where the policy people and the delivery people are in the same space, which means that as policy changes, you can change the delivery mechanism, but also, and more importantly, as the data changes, you can then make the policy change. And you can start to create a government that's not only works for its citizens, but is relevant for its citizens. And that relies on excellent user research. It relies on using design as your core methodology, as the core thing. The design of the services are so important. And it also means being big enough to work out that you need to use continuous, iterative approaches that mean you change as your people change. Remember, the system that we built in 2008 that was there to work forever, we've probably paid for it twice in all the change control requests we had to bring in. This gets out of that massive cost burden. It reduces the risk, and it delivers government services that work for people. And so this is the mantra. Don't do it all yourself. You can't. Work with other people. As governments, we can work with other governments. We don't compete. And if we start to focus on what really works for citizens is the design and delivery of great services. And that massively reduces the size, the scale, and the cost of the tech that runs behind it. We remove the friction, because if you remove friction from services, things work more effectively. More people will use them. More people will go to use the digital service, and we will start to enable the policy aim we started with, which was digital by default. Digital services that are so good, people prefer to use them. And so that's how we're going to make sure the government keeps moving fast. And GovTech is a growth market. If you want to work and interact with government, if you want to, and you have components for government, the digital marketplace, the address of which is at the bottom left, that's where you can apply to deliver your services to the British government. And we want new, innovative services that help us deliver better services for our citizens. And because of the way we've done this and because of the way we've built this, we now know we can do it, and those numbers should help you realize that we're serious about this. If we're going to get more than half of our business coming in on new tech from small businesses, that's going to change not only the way the British government works, but also it's going to be a great magnet for new tech to come into our country. So thank you very much for listening. I'm open to questions.